All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm pleased to welcome you to another session. This is our 8th class of Democracy and Disagreement. I'm Deborah Satz, and along with Paul Brest, I'm the faculty lead for the course, and Graham Ambrose is the TA. Each of our 10 classes has addressed a contemporary issue of policy about which people hold differing views. Each class has had 2 immediate goals: to illuminate the issues, and to do so by modeling the critical, empirically informed, respectful conversations that lie at the heart of the university's mission, the pursuit of knowledge. We also hope to shed light in this course on why some degree of disagreement is an inevitable feature of a democratic society. As I've said, only dictatorships produce an outward appearance of conformity and unanimity on a wide range of issues. Yet while disagreement is a feature and not a bug of democracies, it's hard. And it's especially hard when the stakes of the disagreement are high. The first part of today's class will be devoted to such a difficult issue. You'll recall that last week, our guests discussed the constitutional and free speech issues raised by legislative efforts to regulate content moderation by social media companies. Today's class probes another aspect of social media, its effect on the mental health of children and young adults. As has been noted in the readings for today, social media use by youth, and I should say by adults, is nearly universal. Up to 95% of youth between ages 13 and 17 in the US report using a social media platform, with more than a third saying they use social media, quote, almost constantly, unquote. Although age 13 is commonly the minimum required age on social media platforms in the US, nearly 40% of children between the ages of 8 and 12 use social media. So it's ever-present, significant change in our lives, and scholars and the public are divided on the benefits and harms of this technology. And we've seen wide swings in how people are thinking about these technologies. Jonathan Haidt, a psychology professor at NYU, for example, wants to take away smartphones from children. His new book, The Anxious Generation, argues that the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness, and blames the spike in teenage depression and anxiety on the use of smartphones. Others are not convinced, worrying that a moral panic has set in with not enough good data to support it. In addition to the issues of evidence with respect to children and young adults' mental health, there are a host of other broader questions about the role of digital technology in our lives and in our democracy. Our guests today discuss the question of whether social media are addictive. A yes answer might justify different sets of regulations than a no answer. During the second part of the class, you'll have the chance to ask questions and make comments, not speeches, but comments of the sort appropriate to furthering discussion. Of course, if you hear something that you really disagree with, you are encouraged to ask hard questions of our speakers during question and answer. Before I introduce today's topic and the speakers, if you're a student enrolled in the course, could you scan the QR code on the screen, is it up there, and fill out the Google form for attendance? So just take a minute to do that. And while you're doing that, I will again say, and we'll put up the question in a minute, but our topic is, are social media addictive? And we're fortunate to have 2 knowledgeable and thoughtful participants to discuss this issue. Anna Lebke is a professor of psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine and chief of the Stanford Addiction Medicine Dual Diagnosis Clinic. A clinician scholar, she's the author of many peer-reviewed publications She's testified before the U.S. State House of Representatives and the Senate, has served as an expert witness in federal and state opioid litigation, and is an internationally recognized leader in addiction medicine, treatment, and education. Her latest book, Dopamine Nation: Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence, combines the neuroscience of addiction with the wisdom of recovery to explore the problems of compulsive overconsumption in a dopamine-overloaded world. Dr. Lemke appeared in the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, which looks at the impact of social media on our lives. Jeff Hancock is the founding director of the Stanford Social Media Lab and is the Harry and Norman Chandler Professor of Communication at Stanford. Professor Hancock and his group work on understanding psychological and interpersonal processes in social media. His team specializes in using computational linguistics and experiments to understand how the words we use can reveal psychological and social dynamics, such as deception and trust, emotional dynamics, intimacy and relationships, and social support. Professor Hancock is well known for his research on how people use deception with technology, from sending texts and emails to detecting fake online reviews. He was, interestingly, a customs officer in Canada before earning his PhD in psychology. Each of our speakers will speak for about 10 to 12 minutes and then converse until around 4:15. The floor will then be open for questions from the audience. We're also going to survey you now, in a moment, to see whether we'll survey you before and after, beginning of class and at the end, to see whether arguments move minds. But of course, even if minds aren't moved, we hope the class gives you an appreciation of the reasoning behind the views you hold, as well as those views you reject. So here is the question again that we're posing today, and we'll take the poll. And the question should be appearing: are social media addictive?
It's up there.
And it takes a few moments for the poll results to come in, so please answer the poll. Up. So, pretty strong case for addiction here.
96%, yes.
Okay. Yes, the challenge has been accepted. All right. Anna Lemke will begin the conversation.
Great. So I'm going to talk a little quickly. I have 12 minutes to get through a little bit of material. To start, I always like to let folks know my conflicts of interest. I have been retained as a medical expert witness in opioid litigation and newly in social media litigation. What is social media? Broadly defined, social media is interactive technologies that allow for expression through virtual communities and networks. What is addiction? Addiction is the continued compulsive use of a substance or behavior despite harm to self and or others. Neuroscience is at a state where we actually have a pretty good sense of what's going on in the brain when people become addicted. It is a brain disease, but it's what we call a complex biopsychosocial disease. So there are biological elements, psychological elements, and contextual environmental elements. And despite it being a brain disease, we still base our diagnosis on what we call phenomenology. That is to say, there's no brain scan or blood test to diagnose addiction. We base it on patterns of behavior over time. And the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders is basically a list of criteria that we go through to see whether or not a person meets threshold criteria for addiction. That list of criteria can be summarized as the 4 C's plus tolerance and withdrawal. The 4 C's are out of control use, compulsive use, cravings, and continued use despite consequences, even if the individual doesn't recognize those consequences. Tolerance and withdrawal have to do with the physiologic dependence on the drug. Tolerance is needing more of a substance over time to get the same effect, or finding that with repeated use, our drug stops working. A withdrawal has to do with a physiological and psychological reaction to the absence of the drug or trying to cut back. Is social media addictive? I think that yes, it is addictive, and I base that on something that I base it on my clinical experience. So over the past 10 years or so, we've been seeing 10 to 15 years, increasing numbers of patients coming in who are manifesting all of the signs and symptoms of addiction, but their drug of choice is digital media, social media. So when we think about that more broadly epidemiologically, I refer to the Bradford-Hill criteria of causality. When you're dealing with a complex new disease, especially when it's related to trying to figure out whether an exposure in the environment is causing an illness, especially if that substance is relatively new, the Bradford-Hill criteria are a useful way to assess causality. What we have right now is a lot of correlational studies showing that people who consume a lot of social media or other digital media are more likely to have all kinds of mental health harms. They're more likely to be depressed. They're more likely to be anxious. They're more likely to have problems with attention, with sleep, etc. So in order to try to tease apart, is this just correlation or is it causation, the Bradford-Hill criteria can be very useful. The Bradford-Hill criteria were actually created or systematized by the epidemiologists who were involved in showing that cigarettes cause lung cancer. So I'm going to talk about a few of those Bradford-Hill criteria today. First of all, analogy. So whether or not the toxic exposure manifestation is similar to other types of disease processes for which we know the toxin. And there's analogous phenomenology with drug and alcohol addiction and social media addiction. So that is to say, the natural history of that disease looks very similar in people who get addicted to social media as people who get addicted to drugs and alcohol. People start out using either for fun or to solve a problem. If it works for them, they will return to using that substance or behavior. Over time, they will eventually develop tolerance, needing more of that substance or in more potent forms to get the same effect. Then they will be marshaling a lot of their resources to get the drug, consume the drug, hide drug use, and then they will have difficulty stopping even when there are consequences. And that's exactly what we see when folks get addicted to social media. Another Bradford-Hill criteria is biological plausibility. Does it make sense, just on a simple biological level, that social media could cause somebody to have a brain problem? And the answer is yes, because social media works on our brains. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a condensed version of the neuroscience of addiction and the little bit of sort of inferences we can make based on what social media does to the brain. Temporality, this is a difficult one. Which one comes first? This can be very difficult to tease out because people, when they're retrospectively looking at their behaviors, they can often not be the best judge of what came first, social media or anxiety and depression. But there are ways to look at this in a large epidemiologic way, which is what Jonathan Haidt and others have done, looking at when social media entered campuses, when it entered schools, or when people switched online, and then noting that rates of depression and anxiety increased shortly thereafter. So that's one of the ways to get at that. And then finally, experimentation. That is to say, when we intervene and take the drug away, in this case social media, do the downstream effects of social media improve? Do people get better? I'm realizing I'm going to have to really race through these. I'll do my best. Okay, biological. So phenomenologically, there is lots of evidence that the habit formation phenomenon that we see in addiction is manifesting itself with social media. So you have the analogous relationship with drugs and alcohol. In terms of biological plausibility, we know that social media works on the brain. We know that there's a dedicated reward pathway in the brain consisting broadly of the nucleus accumbens and ventral tegmental area, rich in dopamine-releasing neurons, as well as the prefrontal cortex. The nucleus accumbens is like the accelerator on the car. The prefrontal cortex is like the brakes. Addiction is a problem either with too much accelerator or too few brakes. We know that the more dopamine that's released in response to a substance or a behavior, the more likely that substance or behavior is to be addictive. These are experiments done in rats. When you put a probe into their nucleus accumbens to measure dopamine levels, you can see how much dopamine levels rise in response to these different substances. The best analogy here is for sex, which increases dopamine firing about 100% above baseline. Unfortunately, we don't have little mini smartphones that we can give to rats and mice to measure their dopamine response in response to social media. But interestingly, recently there were some scientists in France who did rig up this device so that rats could take pictures, selfies of themselves. They at first paired it with sugar, and they got them to start taking the selfies, but pretty soon they didn't need to have any sugar at all. Rats were very happy to repeatedly take their picture and look at themselves. What happens in the brain after we repeatedly expose our brains to highly reinforcing substances and behaviors? Our brain has to adapt by downregulating dopamine transmission. It does this by decreasing dopamine transmission, not just to tonic baseline levels of dopamine firing, but actually below baseline to the dopamine deficit state. And this is what we mean by saying that dopamine is not just about pleasure, it's also about motivation. And when we get into that dopamine deficit state, we essentially are in this state of craving where now we're needing to use our drug of choice, not to solve the original problem or to feel good, but just to stop feeling bad, what George Koob has called dysphoria-driven relapse. These are human brain scans of individuals, healthy controls on the left-hand side, and people who have been addicted to these variety of substances on the right-hand side. And you can see here that the nucleus accumbens is full of red, which represents healthy dopamine transmission on the left-hand row. But the right-hand column, there's almost no red in the nucleus accumbens. And these images were taken 2 weeks after these individuals stopped using their drug of choice. In other words, they are in a chronic dopamine deficit state, which, by the way, is akin to a clinical depression, which is why people with addiction will manifest with anxiety, irritability, insomnia, dysphoria, craving, the universal symptoms of withdrawal from any addictive substance. Representing that in a very simplified form graphically, when we're initially exposed to a reinforcing substance or behavior, we get that spike in dopamine, followed by dopamine free fall, not just to baseline, but below baseline, before going back to the baseline position. This is how our brain returns to homeostasis, or baseline levels of dopamine firing. But with repeated exposure, that upward deflection gets weaker and shorter in duration. That downward response gets stronger and longer, and we can end up in this dopamine deficit state, which again looks like depression, anxiety, inattention, insomnia, and craving. We do not yet have these kinds of brain scan images showing these dopamine level changes in response to social media, but we do have some preliminary evidence that the nucleus accumbens can be affected in individuals who consume large amounts of social media. It's also important to realize that we get a dopamine spike not just in response to the drug itself, but being reminded of the drug. And I want you to think here about notifications, which are so central to the inherent addictive nature of these devices. You'll see this is a study in rats showing that the rat has learned that when it sees a light, it knows it can go press a lever and get intravenous cocaine. And you'll not be surprised to see that dopamine firing increases in response to an injection of cocaine. But I want to focus your attention on this light right here, which is just information the rat is getting that cocaine will soon be available. You'll see that dopamine firing increases a little bit above baseline just by knowing our reward is coming or just by being reminded of it, followed by a little decrement below baseline, a little mini dopamine deficit state that sets us up for craving. And of course, you may be able to relate to putting your phone in your pocket, saying you're not going to grab it, then getting a notification, finding it's very difficult to resist the urge to not get it out. Likewise, what happens when we expect a certain reward and we don't get it, like this rat here, expected this reward, didn't get it, dopamine levels went well below baseline. In other words, when we put something on social media, we've gotten good responses, and then we don't get a response, or we text a friend and they've been responding and then they don't text us back, it's possible we can infer that dopamine levels go well below baseline, and then we're in that state of craving. Again, this is all inferential. We don't actually have direct measurements for social media. This is just highlighting the fact that Kids and teenagers are super vulnerable because red here represents the number of neurons and neuronal synapses that we have. And as we age and go through adolescence, we prune back the neurons that we are not using, and we actually myelinate, as represented here by blue, the neurons that we use most often. In other words, we are creating the scaffolding in our brains that we will use for the rest of our adult lives. So it's really important that we think about prevention and protecting kids. I'm going to just kind of flip through this very quickly and just emphasize experimentation here. In our clinic, what we do for social media and other digital media addiction is recommend a period of abstinence from social media. Not necessarily all screens, but just the particular medium that's been dangerous. What we see is that people initially feel worse before they feel better: anxiety, depression, irritability, insomnia, craving because they're in withdrawal. But then they start to feel better in weeks 3 and 4, and ultimately many of them have a complete resolution of their depression and anxiety symptoms. And now there are studies out there doing this, something similar, having folks reduce their social media use, tracking their symptoms of loneliness and depression in this study, and finding that those improve over the course of 3 weeks. This is not just an individual problem. This is really a collective problem that requires not just bottom-up individual approaches, but top-down approaches at the levels of schools, communities, corporations, and governments. And furthermore, this is not just an individual harm, but these are really diffuse harms. So we can talk about the specific harms of addiction in specific individuals. Most people who drink alcohol do not go on to become alcoholics, but about 10 to 15% of people who drink alcohol will struggle with an alcohol use disorder sometime in their lifetime. This is probably going to turn out to be true for social media. Most people who use social media will not develop a full-blown addiction, but there will be a subset of vulnerable individuals who will, and those are the ones we are seeing in our clinic. But beyond those individual harms, we have the diffuse harms to our society, which I'm metaphorically trying to represent here as an image of the Aral Sea in 1989. You can see plenty of water. And then in 2014, the Aral Sea is an example of a collapsed ecosystem. And I would argue that as we invest more and more of our time, energy, and creativity in the virtual world, we are literally impoverishing our in-real-life experience, meaning that when we try to disengage from the virtual world to go back to having an in-real-life experience, there is genuinely no there. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Anna, and it's great to be here to have this conversation with you. As I was introduced, my name is Jeff Hancock, and I'm going to present the other side of the debate. And as Anna said, talking about conflicts, especially in this highly discussed debate's really important. So I was just helped produce the National Academies of Science report on social media and well-being for adolescents. And one of the important things for being on a National Academy of Sciences committee is you can't be conflicted. Either way, having taken funding from, say, in this case, the platforms, or from those that are involved in lawsuits against the platforms. So that's really important thing about the National Academy of Sciences report that I was on and came out in December. And that is what I shared with the group. So if you're interested in seeing more detail, that our task was to examine what's the empirical evidence for a question related to what Anna was talking about, but not to use analogy, but to actually study the specific empirical evidence on population-level effects of social media on well-being. And I can give you some really high-level things, and then I'm going to go down into why I think what we saw happened, and then address some of Anna's really amazing points, and she's clearly such an amazing thinker about addiction. So first is at the population level, which means if we look at all of the evidence in the field that we've seen in studies that have been published in peer-reviewed journals, can we say that use of social media is associated, so that could be correlated, it could be causal, with well-being harm? The answer is no. There is insufficient evidence to draw that conclusion. Okay? Then I'm going to ask, is there evidence in the field that social media can play a role of benefiting psychological well-being? And the answer there is also no. Now, that's going to come as really surprising, especially after hearing Anna's presentation and a lot of the discourse out in the media. Why could this be? There's a couple of important reasons. The study quality, as Anna mentioned, has been primarily correlational. Around 75% of all the studies in the field have been really simple cross-sectional. It means I ask, say, Deborah, how are you feeling today? And she says something, and they say, Deborah, how much time did you spend on social media yesterday? And you get a correlation there. And that can be really useful. It can tell us, like, if something's happening, if there's a correlation, we can examine it, but it's not very powerful from causal work. Gold standard studies that either use longitudinal approaches to get to causal evidence or randomized controlled trials make up a much smaller amount of the evidence. And even those have found mixed and small effects. Some of those studies finding that the effects are estimated at precisely 0, while others find some positive effects, some others negative, in some ways depending on what they're looking at and what continent they're on. And third, that there are some that show that the way we're feeling, our psychological well-being, can drive use of social media. So if you're feeling, for example, anxious or lonely, you may be more likely to use social media. And we can't catch that in a correlation approach like I asked Deborah. Given everything that Anna said and the discourse and concern in the community, why might that be the case? Well, certainly the fact that there's no evidence so far that there's relationships doesn't mean that there is no evidence. So that is one thing. The other could be that we don't have enough research yet, and that's probably also true, though I can tell you there's well over 700 peer-reviewed studies on this topic. There are over 70 meta-analyses that have looked at this, right? So if there is this hugely addictive effect, I feel like over the last 18 years, of which studies on this began, we would at least see some pretty good evidence of this. So what else could explain this? What else could explain why we see this sort of mixed to small effects? Well, I'm going to introduce, I think, an important concept for the debate, and that is heterogeneity. Heterogeneity is a fancy word for us to use, which means there's high variance. And I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 different sources that the National Academy of Sciences Committee identified. The first is there is no such thing as social media anymore. Although I agree with Anna's definition, and the one that we use in my lab is much broader than that, there is no one way to use social media. Even within one platform, you can use messaging, which is between people. You can use a feed, which involves algorithms and typically people you don't know. There is almost no similarity between something like Facebook's news feed and TikTok, in which you're looking at different kinds of content from, in one case, people that you are somewhat related to in a network, and another, like TikTok, where you don't know them and it's not expected that you are. So one problem with this question is the first part, which is this idea of social media. There is extremely high heterogeneity in the different things we can do with social media. The second is content. We can talk about using social media a lot, and one of the areas that Anna and I agree is that if you're using social media for like 5 to 8 hours a day, that's going to be problematic for you. And not in any mysterious way. You're not going to get your work done. You're not going to get your homework done. You're going to sleep less. You're going to interact with other people like your family and friends less. This is just a displacement thing, and for people that are engaged in social media that much, that's going to be a problem. But what that ignores is what the people are doing. Right now, I could go on to my social media and I could have some content on there from my family and friends up in British Columbia lamenting that the Vancouver Canucks lost in the playoffs game in the NHL last night, which I'm sure all of you watched as well, right? Everyone's watching the NHL playoffs. Now, that would be, what's that? Go Oilers. Yes, right on. Yeah, exactly. That's who we're shifting to next. So I'm sharing this information, this content with my family and friends about something that's important to me and reminding me of my family back home and my friends there who are really important to me. And I'm doing that on social media. Almost nobody, including Anna, I think, would think that that is problematic. That psychologically, actually, that's going to be really healthy and beneficial for me. We can also imagine that, for instance, I've gone through a difficult breakup, perhaps a divorce. And I'm in a really difficult psychological spot, and I go and I stalk my ex-partner. Or I harass her, right? That, everybody will agree, is psychologically problematic and will be undermining for my well-being. And there's other times where I could just be using it at the end of the day or while I wait in line at the grocery store and I look at some stupid stuff about cats or whatever, and it's completely unrelated to my well-being in some ways, certainly not about productivity or anything like that, but I'm doing it to say, relax, unwind, entertain myself, not be bored. Now, depending on where I am, for example, that could be really nice. I'm not as bored waiting in line at the dentist, and it could be extremely harmful, for instance, if I'm driving a vehicle. Right? So what the content is matters far more, in my view, than whether this is social media or not. And what kind of things are on social media and what area I'm using it, for instance, is an algorithm involved, matters a lot as well. And that is not in this question, is social media addictive? And let me get to the third part of heterogeneity, and that's us, people. What I really love about Anna and her work is she's very person-centric. And I feel like this debate has lost that. And I'm not talking about the debate between Anna and I, but in general. It's tech first. And we, people, get lost in this. Technology, social media, is doing this to us. We have no agency in this view, right? We have no ability to change how we do things. And what we're finding in the field of evidence, again, over 700 studies, is that there's heterogeneity in people's relationships with social media. As Anna pointed out, there are some people that really struggle, and when they're using social media, it is harmful for them. And those people need to get into clinicians' offices like Anna, and they need help. And on the other side of the spectrum, there are people for whom this is a lifeline. Their ability to express their identity and be who they are is constrained in some other ways in the real world, that if they didn't have it, it would undermine their well-being. You can imagine, say, an LGBTQ person in Arkansas or somebody suffering from a rare disease and nobody around them knows or understands that, but online they can get social support 24/7. Again, the kind of activity that very few people would say, this is harmful for your well-being. The problem with the second part of this question of addiction is that it undermines that notion of agency, and it harms people both that are struggling and that are using it for real positive benefits in their life. And what I would argue is the vast group of people in the middle for which social media effect on their well-being is far less important than the things we know and have known for decades with well-worked out research that doesn't involve analogy or inferences. How's your diet? What's your exercise like? How's your social life, right? And are you getting enough sleep at night? Because as Anna said, if you undermine any of those, and if social media is playing a role in undermining those, that's going to be a problem. But why might asking this question this way be a problem for the people that Anna is there to help? Well, by us talking about everyone being addicted, and for instance, 96% of the folks in this room thinking that it's addictive, is we're not highlighting for those folks, maybe it's 5%, maybe it's as high as Anna said, 15%, they're being lumped in with everybody else that's like, yeah, I find it addictive, I have a hard time putting it down after work, which is to me not addictive, and I want to talk to Anna more about that. That's just like we're using something, and just like my wife and I watched Bridgerton with our daughter for too long last night, and I regret that, but I don't feel like I'm addicted to Bridgerton or TV. And it harms the people that are being benefited, because when they use it, they're worried like, oh my God, like I'm going on here to get this help, or I've created this business that in my own community I couldn't do because it's wrong in my area, that they're now being told that what they're using is this thing that's harmful for them, despite the real serious benefits they're getting. And lastly, it's harmful for the vast majority of people for whom most of the time it's a way to connect with family, friends, and watch stuff that's not that important to them. It's just entertainment. It'd be like saying watching NHL hockey, right, is harmful because you spent 3 or 4 hours last night doing it. Or you're watching whatever, say, NFL on Sunday. We don't pathologize that, even though people in America spend well over 8 hours on the weekend watching football on TV. Lots of times that can be really beneficial because they're doing it with other people. So it's not just time, right? It's not how much we're using social media. It's what are we doing it for and who are we doing it with? And how is that related to us? So the last thing I'll say is the worry I have about putting this mental health framing on it, again, is it undermines the people that actually need help from Anna and other clinicians, is it gets in front of another thing that's more important. If we're worried about this stuff, it's usually because, hey, my daughter is like not paying attention or being rude when we're trying to have dinner. That's about us. And when we say it's addictive, it takes away our responsibility. If I don't want Deborah on the phone while I'm talking to her, we need to decide that and what's okay. So I do think that we have responsibility to decide how we want these technologies to fit in our life. And if we say it's addictive, we're taking away our responsibility and putting it on the platforms. And Mark Zuckerberg is going to fix this. I completely agree with Anna's final point that this is not about one thing or the other. This is all of us. I think it's us deciding what's okay, not whether it's harming you because you're on it or you're doing that and it's annoying me, but we should talk about that. It's parents. Oh my God, I feel so bad for parents these days. It's horrible if you let your kids use social media, and it's horrible if you don't let them use it, right? And we know that abstinence policies always work really well with kids, right? Like always abstinence works. So let's try that again here. So instead, like thinking about what kids can get out of it, but without throwing them in the deep end. Anna's totally right that we haven't provided the support for kids to understand when are they getting into a problematic space, maybe when are they using it in ways that are undermining their life. What skills can we give them to help? We do need to regulate the platforms. We need to redistribute the way profits are being distributed from this. And we need to help parents, right? We really need to help parents. So I'll end there just saying that I think the question is wrong, and I think the actual framing of the question is part of the problem. Thanks.
So, and I want to give you a chance to respond, and then I have some questions.
Okay, great. So thank you. That was helpful to hear your perspective. I guess, a lot of different points. I'll just try to hone in on a few. First, I would disagree with you that the evidence is insufficient to show causality. I think it is sufficient. And furthermore, when you're dealing with epidemics, the pathophysiology of which is unclear, historically, we have often relied on those early sentinel reports before we can rely on academic peer-reviewed medical literature, because that almost always follows the sentinel events. What do I mean by sentinel events? I mean kids dying, parents desperate, consumers themselves saying, I am consuming more than I want to, more than I need to, and it's making me feel bad. I know you don't like analogies, but to analogize to opioids, which I think is an apt analogy, because opioids are a useful tool in our pharmacopoeia, and yet opioids are inherently addictive. And anybody who is treated with opioids has the potential to become addicted to opioids. So you can have something that's a useful tool and is also inherently addictive. And I would argue that social media can be a useful tool, but the medium itself is addictive. So content is important, and content can cause all kinds of harms, but separate from the content, the medium is reinforcing, and for vulnerable individuals, it's potentially life-threatening. Your point that people are anxious and lonely to start, and that's why they use social media, I don't disagree with at all. There are people who are going to be more vulnerable to the harms of social media than others, and we know that co-occurring psychiatric disorders will make people more vulnerable to addiction of all types. So I don't think those things are either or. In terms of sort of quantity and frequency don't matter, I really think they do matter. And we see that with drugs too. So people who use drugs every day, who use large quantities of drugs, are more likely to get addicted than people who use drugs, even drugs like heroin, intermittently or infrequently, and give their brains enough time to recalibrate. So this really cannot just be, and I think you agree with this too, something like we need to have our own personal agency. And if we call this addiction, then we're going to be absolved of the responsibility. I actually almost see it opposite. We have a social responsibility to appreciate the inherent addictive nature of social media, digital media, the devices, the internet, and to put guardrails in place to protect those who cannot self-correct. And trust me, those people exist, and it's really life-threatening when they get to that place. So yeah, I think I'll just stop there.
Yeah. Thanks, Anna. Yeah, all great points. And I just want to finish with start with your last point there, which is I want to recognize that for some people, this is really problematic and they need help. And I think that's one of my main points here is we're obscuring it for everybody, including those people that need the most help by generalizing it. And I want to go to, let's do an analogy. So here's my take. I think with opioids, which you know a lot about, I think it is very clear that those are going to be super problematic. They can be used in very highly regulated spaces, et cetera. But I can't start a company with opioids, and I can't express myself, and I can't connect with my mom back home or anything like that, right? So I think that it's just not an accurate analogy. There's so many positive things that people can do, or neutral, that is completely different from opioids. And the analogy I would use is a car. Cars kill, on average, about 42,000 Americans every year, right? So I don't know how many people have been killed or seriously harmed by social media, but 42,000 is a lot. And we still drive. And we don't call cars addictive, despite we know that it's harmful for people. It's harmful for society. They're the #1 contributor to climate change, right? So instead of talking about us all being addicted, because we have to, for example, drive to get to our work or school, we've done a bunch of things. One of them is regulation. We have regulated the crap out of them, and thank goodness, because back 40 years ago, so many people died because of auto accidents. We've also changed the norms. Back when my parents were driving, I was in the back seat. Smoking in a car with kids was no problem. Kids in the back seat, we were dying. I was like, oh my God. And now people don't do that. Drinking and driving was allowed back then, was normatively acceptable. We're not down with that anymore either. And we've made the technologies more safe, better to help people, right? The last is, I agree, I don't want to make this like, this is all up to you, you need to be a better person. I definitely don't want that to be the agency part of it. I do think we have some responsibility as society to equip us to be better. So when my dad got his license in Canada in the 60s, he went in, he took a multiple choice test, and he left that day with his driver's license, right? It's different now. It's about 2 years here in California with a substantial amount of time in probation, because we now know how dangerous a tool like a car is. We also recognize how important and useful it can be for many people. And so we are trying to optimize the benefits, allowing people to get to their jobs and go to school, while minimizing the real harms, deaths, and change to the climate, right? And so that's the way I think we should approach this, rather than something like opioids, which in rare instances can be useful. Somebody's, on the operating table, and most of the time is harmful.
Okay, so the car analogy, cars have been highly regulated,
Yes.
right? So we need to regulate social media, right? So maybe we don't disagree there. Are cars inherently addictive? I mean, I have had some people who are really into cars, but when I use the term addiction and driving cars fast, but when I use the term addiction, I'm talking about a form of psychopathology. So in using that term addiction, and maybe this is just an issue of language, I'm recognizing an extreme form of mental illness.
Right.
That addiction is used more commonly and colloquially to address the kind of compulsive overconsumption that the average person can relate to when it comes to social media. It sounds like that's what you're objecting to, that you don't like this more diffuse, broad term of the use addiction, and I can appreciate that. But really what I think people are saying is that they can, on some level, relate to the severe form of psychopathology that we know of as addiction, because they themselves are experiencing what Aristotle has called this wide-eyed incontinence. I do the thing that I do not want to do. So I don't know, maybe we have a language problem here, but I think the behavior is the same. It's a spectrum of behavior. There's compulsive overconsumption that might not meet threshold criteria, my threshold criteria or a psychiatrist for addiction, but that is relatable to that more severe version.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, like, I use social media today, and I don't want to put it on myself, and I know I'm an N of one, and everybody, that's part of my heterogeneity point, is different. I don't feel like I'm in withdrawal. Did I feel like I used it too much? Maybe. But to me, the criteria that you laid out for addiction just doesn't apply to most people's use of it on an everyday basis. My guess is that for most people, most of the time, it's a minor part of their day's well-being contributors, and that their diet, sleep, et cetera, is much more. And so I want to reserve the pathologizing for the folks that really need your help. And I think by using the term addiction, it muddies the water for everybody, including those folks that need the help.
That's fair.
So I want to follow up on that, and then I have a question for both of you. So when I think about addiction, I think also about diminished responsibility, that we hold people to a different standard because we say in some way they couldn't really do otherwise. And I can see that in the case of, opioids, physical addiction, where you really, if you try not to take it, there are a bunch of symptoms, you're not in control of those symptoms. The analogy I see similarities, but I don't see a complete analogy here with social media, because it does seem like you're not less responsible. It reminds me of the Twinkie defense that was used. Well, that's why I had to commit a murder, because I was addicted to Twinkies. It doesn't feel like it's at the same level of I couldn't but do otherwise. And so I just wonder about that analogy and the idea of diminished responsibility.
Yeah, happy to address that. So, what we see in extreme cases of addiction to digital media is that people really do lose agency, and they want to stop engaging with the device and with the digital medium, and they are literally unable to. And when it is taken away from them, we see physiologic withdrawal. So for example, we have reports from parents who, when they take the device away, experience their children going into complete meltdowns, rage attacks, acute suicidality. These are sometimes young children, sometimes teenagers. And it's not, you could argue, well, is there some manipulative element? Maybe, but in many instances that we see, it looks like a physiologic withdrawal. We also see adults who stop digital media who have physical symptoms, headache, nausea, vomiting, very, very like what you would see in withdrawal to substances. So I appreciate that intellectually, that feels like a stretch, but I can tell you clinically, what we are seeing is something that really does strongly suggest that there has been a brain alteration that is very similar to what we see in drug and alcohol addiction.
So let me follow up on that, and maybe this is also for both of you. I wonder if there's a difference with young children versus older adults, because we also don't hold young children as fully responsible. We see them as having diminished agency, and because their brains are developing in a way that if you're 18, your brain is no longer developing in the same way. So do you see differences depending on the age?
Oh, I absolutely see children as more vulnerable. There's no doubt about it. And I think prevention is key here. And when I think about policy interventions, I think about policy interventions for youth. And that's really, it's, if social media is a drug, it's a legal drug, right? And so, but I nonetheless feel that we as a society need to put provisions in place for even those adults who can become addicted. What does that mean? Provisions mean things like, treatment options for people who get addicted to the various forms of digital media that are out there. And again, all I can tell you is that, fully functioning Stanford professors can have their lives taken over by digital media in a way that really identically mimics what we see with addiction to drugs and alcohol.
And I'm wondering, for you, about young children, do you put them in a different category?
Yeah, one of the things about that concept, heterogeneity, that I didn't have time to get into was the committee in its analysis, because we're tasked with looking at adolescents, realized how heterogeneous, how different kids are. So just take the legal range for their use of technology, 13 to 19. Like, there's just no similarity between a 13-year-old and a 19-year-old. And there's a number of studies coming out recently with some interesting guideline conclusions, which is at age 14 for girls, 15-ish for boys, they start to develop this skepticism, for instance, which my 13-year-old daughter is certainly displaying towards me and my views, where they're able to like resist some of the things they might encounter on social media, in particular ads. It's one of the reasons that we try to protect young children, because they are not as cognitively developed. So absolutely, I completely agree that we need to put guidelines in place, regulation around that, as well as education. I think it's a really crucial time to give them some skills.
So here's a question for each of you. What might cause you to change your mind?
Well, I'll tell you, while Anna's thinking of hers, when Anna, and Anna and I have talked about this, and we've had some really good conversations, so it's really great to do this with all of you. When Anna and others that are clinicians get the cases that are the worst, most upsetting ones, and when you see the role that social media may have played in that person's life, it is truly upsetting, and we need to protect those most vulnerable. Right? And so I think that those are really compelling stories, and I like Anna's point about sentinel cases. We should be approaching this with a standard of care kind of approach, and I want to do that in a way that's evidence-based rather than a way that's just purely out of fear. And so to me, it is about balancing the fact that many people get legitimate, genuine psychological benefits from this, and trying to connect that with the kinds of cases that Anna sees that are really so upsetting for families. It's just difficult from an epidemiological place to take one person's experience and generalize that to the population. So one sort of note that I love that a colleague of mine, Byron Reeves, said is, don't take population level statistics and apply it to yourself or your kids. It's partly where Anna and I really agree, which is put the child or put yourself in the center of the question and ask it about yourself. Because the population level statistics, and here Anna and I just have to agree, the evidence is not there to say that if you use it, you will be addicted or harmed, period. I mean, that's my view. I feel very strong about that. But those cases that Anna has to deal with, that is the kind of thing that is like, yes, we need to be really approaching it with care.
But you said there's no evidence, good evidence now. You disagree about that, but can you imagine studies that would show causation that could change your mind?
Yeah, I think it's yes. So the answer is yes. There are these what are called deprivation studies where you have large-scale numbers of people that are randomly assigned to either use it or not. There's been a number of these, not a lot, less than 10. And they have shown that you get a reduction in, for example, anxiety on a Likert scale of about half a standard deviation. So before you may be on a 5 out of 7, and now you're at 4.5. So you've reduced your anxiety. But let me be really clear. That is not what Anna's talking about, right? And that's what bothers me is most of the evidence here is around changes on, say, an anxiety scale, right? Because when those people don't use it, they also feel less connected, right? So there's this sort of well-being harm that happens. But both of those things, changes on a scale, are not what Anna's talking about. And to me, it's qualitatively different. Those are people that are absolutely struggling with all aspects of life, and it's harming them and their family. That is not a change on a Likert scale.
Yeah, just to clarify what my opinion is, because you said something that suggested something that's not my opinion. It is not. I am not saying that all people who use social media will get addicted to social media. So I hope that's clear to you. What I'm saying is that the medium itself, the social media itself, the algorithms are designed to be addictive. So they are inherently addictive, the way that opioids are inherently addictive, the way that alcohol is inherently addictive. But that doesn't mean that every person who engages with social media will become addicted. In fact, it will be a minority of people. And certainly some of us will be more vulnerable than others based on nature, nurture, neighborhood, et cetera. In terms of what would convince me, so to me, some of the most compelling data for causality is that when we intervene and take social media away or reduce social media, we see that symptoms of depression and anxiety improve as long as it is taken away for long enough. Which is actually remarkable when you consider the diffuse harms of social media, which impoverish our in-real-life experience, because when people are trying to stop or reduce social media, not only are they not having access to social media, but they're also living in a world where nobody's there, or they have fewer opportunities for other kinds of in-real-life experience. And they're also largely potentially missing out on some in-real-life experiences because people are communicating online about where those in-real-life experiences are. So what would be very compelling to me, either to reinforce my opinions about causality or to persuade me otherwise, is if you took a large group of individuals, you had a control group, and in your intervention group, you took them off of social media for a minimum of 4 weeks, but preferably longer, because we know it takes a long time for the brain to readapt. And you also put them in an enriched environment where they had lots of other people who were not on social media and lots of hobbies and interesting things to do that weren't mediated by the virtual world, because we're living in a hegemonic digital space, right? And if you did that and those people were still depressed and anxious and craving social media, if you did that and those people were still depressed and anxious and hadn't improved, I might then be persuaded that their social media consumption was not contributing to the problem.
Paul.
Could I ask two questions? The first is sort of a meta level about evidence, because a lot of what we have looked at in the previous weeks is people with contending assertions about evidence. What's interesting is that and I'll put this to you, and I may have it wrong, but Anna's evidence is clinical, both looking at individuals and then individuals who she sees, but also then looking at brains of rats, and eventually maybe you could look at the brains of people with fMRI. And Jeff, your evidence is population level, epidemiological.
Not quite. They're social science studies that do samples that are representative of the population.
But even with that, they really are two radically different sources of evidence. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if either of you want to comment on those different kinds of evidence.
Yeah, I'll start. Sure, I think they're both really important. As I said, I think that there are people that really struggle that need the kind of help that Anna can offer. How those two types of evidence differ when you have something heterogeneous like the association of social media with well-being is that we don't want to take that portion of the population and generalize it to everybody else, because I think that just pathologizes for things for whom most of the time, for most people, it's either not related to well-being or potentially healthy. But okay, so how do we make the decisions about this? There are some studies on using fMRI now, well-funded, multi-year. They're about 6 years in now, called the ABC studies. And this one is good. It's as close as Ann and I will probably be able to come on a set of evidence that we could agree on. The neuroscience is fantastic. It's really well worked out. These are top people that do fMRI. We know what the brain scans are telling us. For the first several years, the other side of the equation was, hey, Deborah, how much did you use social media yesterday? A single item. They've changed that, so they're starting to get into more questions that are more in depth, like how much and what kinds of social media are you using, what are you doing with it. But even those are showing really minor differences at the brain level. Again, this is with about 1,200 participants, adolescents. And so I think even for the kind of research that's being done that is neuroscience, there is nothing conclusive out of it yet. And I think that would be one place with those studies, which just still have a lot of limitations. That's a place where we could connect on with the neuroscience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the clinical evidence is so powerful, not just my clinic, clinics across the country, the mental health issues that many parents are reporting around their kids, the explosion in mental health issues that can be correlated, with the advent of social media, which is epidemiologic evidence, but also clinical evidence. Is really important. If you look at the history of medicine, almost every major new disease process manifested initially as clinical evidence. And for example, malaria, right? It took us a long time to figure out what was the causative agent in malaria, and yet it was very clear that people were sick. So I think the clinical evidence, and again, I use the opioid litigation, those first Sentinel reports in West Virginia about people addicted to and misusing OxyContin, which were shot down for years. It took 2 decades for us to have the wealth of epidemiologic evidence that we have today to say, oh yes, we are in an opioid epidemic. Can you imagine if we waited till 2024 to act on that? We would be in much worse shape than we are now.
I think rather than ask another question, turn it back to Deborah and then to
I think we can
You all.
open it up to the audience now, so please come up with your questions.
Hi, I'm Sabrina Bram. I'm a pediatrician at the School of Medicine. Thank you both so much for doing this. I find these, and to Dean Satz, I find these conversations really very helpful. I too agree that this question of whether or not social media is addictive almost needs to be a little more nuanced. I see the value in asking that question as it relates to policy, but as a pediatrician, we're the sort of lowest on the food chain and really in the nuts and bolts of how families function. And the question in my mind that we try to get at with this addiction question is, what should we do in practice? What should we recommend to families? And the question I always ask parents is, well, what else could kids be doing with that time? And that has some meaning for adults, right? Like we all probably would be better off getting exercise instead of being on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever. Right. But when you're talking about kids, you're actually robbing them of opportunities to develop neuronal connections, right? And so then what we see are lack of social skills, perhaps. But to Dr. Lemke's point, what I worry a lot about is, are we developing a sort of dopamine-seeking normal state in these kids? And if we don't have that answer, how can we talk to families about how they should be thinking about this? And I'll just give one example, and then I would love to hear your response. The analogy that I always think about is ultra-processed foods. Mm-hmm. So 10, 15 years ago, the research on this in terms of how we recommend families deal with that is kids will self-regulate. No food is bad food, and kids will self-regulate. And here we are 15 years later, 30% or more of kids are overweight or obese. It's a real public health issue. And it's becoming increasingly clear that ultra-processed foods hijack the brain's ability to auto-regulate. And so I feel that social media has sort of followed that same path. And as someone who is trying to help families navigate this, how do we resolve that?
Great, I'll answer well. Yeah, you get the mic. So thank you for that, and I'll answer with the analogy first, and then also say please come and help us at the Social Media Lab. We're trying to talk to parents via pediatricians right now too. So I'll end with some advice that we're thinking of. The ultra-processed food is a great example and would fit on his concern around like, oh, well, if you just wait for evidence that there's harm, it might be too late. The analogy to me would be like saying to kids, oh, there's this ultra-processed food, you should avoid food. That is sort of what I think we're telling kids and parents right now. And it's because it's not taking into account that there is different things on social media. Like this idea that it's all one thing is really problematic, right? If you go on and do things that are harmful and you go into spaces that are unhealthy, and there are lots online, that's going to be problematic. But that doesn't mean that you throw out the apples and the carrots and all the things that our parents told us that we should eat. And so that's where it comes down to this abstinence concern I have, which is we're going to tell people to do this, and you don't touch anything at all because it's all bad for you, and we'll be right where we have been with sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Now, what can we tell parents? I think the first question is to ask about the kids, which is probably exactly what you as a pediatrician does, and ask what is going on with the kid. How old are they? How good are they at using media if they are? How good are they at reading books? What's their social life like? All those other things that matter so much, and that there's so much research, evidence with mechanisms well worked out that we can ask about. And then we ask, okay, well, how might social media fit into your family and your child's goals? Do they need social media? I think for most kids before 14, absolutely not. And so then it's like, no, you can't use it there. But it's rather than starting with the tech, and starting with the family and the kid. And I realize that's a little bit high level in general, but that's where I want us to start. It's what pediatricians do all the time. But if you have any other thoughts on that, we'd love to talk to you.
Yeah, so I think the ultra-processed food analogy is a really good one, and we actually use it a lot in clinical care to emphasize the ways in which our ecosystem that we live in our wealthy world, makes us all more vulnerable to the problem of addiction. And when I think about social media, I think about the drugification of social connection, right? That's essentially what the phenomenon is. And so, of course, and by the way, people get addicted to food. We see terrible food addictions, people who use food as a narcotic. They eat until they, pass out in a binge manner. And they're not, they're not doing it with broccoli, right? It's pizza, ice cream, potato chips, cookies. So the intervention there is not abstain from food, obviously not. It is, what is the ultra-processed food that once you start eating it, you have difficulty stopping, which we can then infer means that it's not just serving a nutritional purpose, it's also working on your dopamine reward pathway. So we like to use a bullseye, which is actually a tool that we have adapted from Gamblers Anonymous. You make 3 concentric rings. In the inner ring, you put in the type of social media that is especially pernicious for me, right? Is it YouTube Shorts? Is it TikTok? Is it Twitter? Is it YouTube News? Is it pornography? Is it video games? You put that in the center. That would be your drug of choice. You put in the middle ring the things that will make you be triggered to want your drug of choice, just like the rat with the, seeing the light. So maybe it's somebody who's addicted to video games, watching YouTube videos of other people playing video games would also potentially be something to avoid. I'm not saying avoid forever. We do a sort of intervention of usually about 4 weeks, because we see that that's about the amount of time it takes to reset those reward pathways to get out of that state of craving and depression and anxiety, to allow that person to make a more informed decision about their choices. And in the outer ring, we put the approach behaviors, because there are huge opportunity costs as you identify. What else could you be doing instead of using social media? So we're not talking about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, it would be impossible, again, because we live in a digital hegemony, right? But it's about identifying what is that problematic behavior, that thing that I say, I'm not going to go and watch YouTube videos of Dr. Pimple Popper tonight. My son is actually in the audience, and he can attest to that being a problem for me. I'm not going to not watch or be on any social media. I'm just going to not watch Dr. Pimple Popper for 4 weeks, because once I start watching it, I need a lifeline, to get out of it. What are other things that might trigger me to watch Dr. Pimple? I don't know, watching my kids pop their own pimples. So maybe I'll go out of the room when they do that. I mean, you can come up with a million things. What are my approach behaviors? Wow, I'm going to try to engage in conversation with a family member in the evening. I'm going to go for a walk. So just like we wouldn't feed our kids ice cream for breakfast, we have social norms around these things. What we don't have is social norms around digital media. We don't have a social etiquette, a digital media etiquette, and we need that. And you are going to be instrumental in creating that in your conversations with parents as you validate the inherent addictive nature of the medium. You tell them that they're not alone. It's a broader societal struggle. We're at the beginning of it, which is why the primary evidence is the clinical evidence, but it's super important evidence, right? And then you work out from there and say, what are the small changes that you can make as a family to try to make sure that none of you is enduring the opportunity cost of spending too much time online?
Thank you so much.
I'll say I agree with so much of that because it got specific about things that are harmful for you personally or not, except that calling it a drug. Everything else, I completely agree with that. Love that.
All right, another question.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I just wanted to ask Dr. Lemke if she could maybe, if you think that the population studies will eventually come to a similar conclusion that the clinical evidence has, and then as well maybe how you might design a population study that captures some of the things that they might be missing.
Yeah, so I mean, you can probably guess my answer. I do think that these various population studies, I mean, I think they're already quite convincing and compelling, and I think as time goes on, especially if we can do more large population intervention studies, as I mentioned, that also provide a viable in real life alternative. What's amazing is that in the intervention studies like the one that I showed up there, where you just by reducing social media use to 10 minutes a day from the 2 or 3 hours over the course of 3 weeks, which is not that long, people noted improvements in loneliness and depression. I mean, that's kind of amazing, especially when you consider that perhaps they're quite bored and having other invigorating real life experiences. So one of the things that I'm really excited about in terms of policy interventions, and this is something that I learned about from some folks at Yale Law School who are working on this project, is a social approach where the hardware would actually be created to be interoperable so that people could go on the equivalent of airplane mode in large groups, right? So you could do this at a school, airplane mode at a school, where you could only then use the device for emergency services or very specified functions. I think that would be really huge because, again, the communal nature of this particular type of behavior is just so incredibly powerful. And just again, emphasizing the diffuse harms. I mean, I agree, like the social media addictive, it's kind of a narrow question. Is there continued compulsive use despite harms? I believe there is, but there are lots of other harms, personal harms, and then diffuse harms, the impoverishment of our social engagement, our ability to be present, the opportunity cost, the enormous opportunity cost. So I'm hopeful that those types of broad-scale interventions that allow for communal disengagement from the internet simultaneously, so you're having a rich human interaction together offline, are going to be really helpful for determining causality here.
Yeah, I'll just address that too. I gotta say it's a little bit disheartening as a scientist to have people ask, and you're not the first, and it's totally not on you. It's fine. Be like, yeah, that's all the evidence. There's nearly 1,000 studies got it. But do you think it's going to change because X, Y, or Z? And so like the first study on this was done in 2006. Social media didn't look anything like this, of course, because we can change technologies and they're radically different now. And so, yeah, there's these huge Facebook and Instagram studies that just came out, published in Nature and Science, 20,000 people, 6-week interventions, 0 effects, tight estimates of 0. And it's like, I don't know what else people want to believe about right now. So could it be in the future, things change, and the evidence over the last, 14 years now is wrong? Sure. But instead, I just think, like, listening to what Anna was saying there is like another problem with this is thinking that there's online and it's inherently bad, and there's offline, and it's inherently good. If you guys were all really mean to me and said I was really stupid for making these arguments in the real world, I'd feel pretty bad about it, right? Bad things happen in the real world too, right? And online, bad things really happen. We have been studying child sexual abuse material. This is real trauma for people, right? It's at the same level as like the people that Anna has to help. So let's just recognize that not everything is a panacea in the real world. We can feel pretty bad and have people act poorly towards us. And that not everything online is necessarily worse. I've had lots of interactions online that have led to like lifelong friendships or just joy, or allowing myself to express myself in different ways or stay connected to people in Canada, right? So at the same time, bad stuff happens online and offline. And let's just recognize that they're not like one is better than the other necessarily.
Okay, we're going to go to the next question. I have to say I'm sitting between the two of you, and I feel between the two of you because I'm skeptical of the addiction argument, but I ban social media in my classroom. So why do I ban social media?
Because I think it interferes. I think what Anna is telling you, it interferes with social interaction. But I mean, we could say it's addictive then. But no, I say get your phones down and out and pay attention. This is class. Like, that's a social norm, and I think, Anna, you said that exactly right. There's our norms within our family, within our classroom that we should be deciding about. And yes, sometimes that's hard, and kids screw up because it is a very powerfully, attractive device. But, like, that's us. And, I think we take responsibility for it in some of these cases.
Okay, other question.
Hi, thank you both so much for being here and sharing your perspectives today. You've both started to share how you think it would be a good strategy to find out what specifically on social media is causing you harm and sort of isolate those and separate those. But in my opinion, that's quite often, if maybe even usually, not possible. For example, if you like Dr. Pimple Popper videos, your algorithms are going to learn that, and they're going to bring that up on your feed more often. There's also many issues people face, for example, FOMO or body issues, where it's not a specific account or platform that's causing those issues. It's just things you tend to see on the media overall. People tend to post when they're out with friends that you weren't invited to. People who fit beauty standards tend to go viral more, so you see them on social media more often than the average-looking person. How do you reconcile issues like that you can't isolate without really ditching social media as a whole?
Yeah, so there's no doubt that there are a lot of inherent addictive design features, the algorithm being an important one. The part of the way that they, get your continued engagement is by learning what you've liked before and where you've spent time, and then push notify you or push you with those options going forward. And then the issue is that the more time that you spend on, the more potential mental health harms, right? So all the sequelae, including eating disorders, self-harm, all of that. In clinical care, it really depends on what the particular issue is. If it's sort of a more extreme version of somebody engaging all day long and engaging with all different forms of digital media, not something specifically, then we would say something like maybe don't go connect to the internet for any kind of surfing behavior for a period of time to see if that can help you feel better and also get you out of the state of compulsive continued use. So that's the type of intervention that we would tailor, for that individual. When I think about policy interventions for kids, some of the, things that are being suggested is not using AI algorithms to push content to kids, not tracking kids what they've liked before and taking that information and selling it to other people, not allowing for push notifications for kids at all, or not allowing for push notifications in the middle of the night or during the school hours. So there's a lot of thought and effort now thinking about what are these inherent design elements that keep us clicking and swiping that we can then reduce, some simple that some people talk about being helpful, going grayscale, right? So just it being not as colorful and as vivid can help it be less reinforcing, can make it potentially more likely for somebody to disengage. So, in my opinion, we have to try all of these, right? This is such a new problem, we have to try all of it and just see what helps.
Yeah, I agree with much of what Anna said there. And I loved your point because it's so easy to be like, well, there's good stuff and there's bad stuff, right? And you're like, well, actually, it's just all the stuff. It's good and it's bad at the same time. I love that. So we've been working with a large group of faculty. There's 7 of us, colleagues in computer science led by Michael Bernstein, on rethinking the design part. This is why one place I disagree with Anna is the inherent, design is addictive. We can make choices about how social media is designed. Anna's totally right that right now those algorithms are designed for engagement. There's no question. The value system here is engagement because that drives profit, and these are for-profit companies. So nothing surprising there, 100% true. But that's not the way it has to be. It could be that we want an algorithm that recognizes a value that I appreciate, which might be, say, I want, this is going to sound boring, pro-democracy things. I want to see people that are really into democracy. It's a civics class. And so why can't we use some of these technologies to design things that fit what I want, not what the system has sort of picked up on me wanting in some other way? And so I think that highlights both the problem that Anna's correct about, that right now they're designed for engagement, and a solution, which is maybe that's not the way we should be designing these things. Thank you so much for your point.
Yeah. Another question.
Hi, I have a question about differentiating different types of social media. We've talked a lot about today, is social media addictive, yes or no? And at least in my experience, I think it's important to differentiate, for example, going on LinkedIn and networking. I myself, trying to find a job,
Yeah.
I may be on LinkedIn. But I think that I would not characterize as addictive behavior, whereas being on Instagram Reels, the form factor of having your entire screen be able to swipe, I myself find myself, maybe spending too much time, and I see it with my friends as well. And on top of that, you look at the progression of TikTok having that form factor, specifically the full screen video that you can then swipe to the next video seamlessly. And then you see companies like Instagram adopting that and making it a huge part of their platform.
Right.
And so I think maybe if we could explore the idea of asking not if social media is addictive, but it's clear that that form factor specifically has now made its way to YouTube, Instagram from TikTok, and that's really captivated a large number of youth. So maybe just differentiating that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, email is a form of social media, right? And I mean, although I sometimes feel like I'm addicted to my email, in general, we don't think of email as harmful as something like TikTok. So I think you're, but again, this gets back to the central point, like the medium matters, right? And when we're talking about a moving video with flashing lights, really short duration, push notification, auto replay, infinite scroll, all of these things. Now we're talking about something that is moving away from serving as a tool to connect humans and something that becomes in and of itself reinforcing, absent from any kind of connection I may be making. So, this, and I think this is in line with Jeff's comments too, that let's not say that all social media is addictive, and I would probably agree with that, right? But let's look at what are the inherent design elements of the social media that is addictive, especially if kids are using it, and let's make sure either kids aren't accessing it or we change it so that it serves a positive social function and not this kind of compulsive, passive, consumptive function. But great point.
Yeah, agree mostly entirely with Anna there. I think your point is awesome. And in fact, you gave a better example than I did with LinkedIn and the fact that you're trying to find a job. It's hard to argue that that's going to be problematic. Very few people think of LinkedIn as addictive, and yet if social media is addictive, like we asked the question, then LinkedIn should be banned and is addictive, right? So, great. And Anna and you are both right that these features can be a really problem for me. They're designed, let's not fool around, they're designed to be engaging and to get you to spend time there, right? But we heard the exact same kinds of critiques of pretty much every media technology introduced. In 1942, there was an article about radio and how young people are addicted to it. They show the same exact signs of being addicted as they do to liquor. You see this with TV. There was tens of millions of dollars spent on studying how TV is addictive and it's ruining our brains. Now, I'm sure Anna's the same as me. I'm like, please will you watch some TV with me to my daughter, right? Like the idea that it is somehow deeply harmful or inherently harmful is just, past. And so your point, I think, about focusing on some of these features and how we need to be thoughtful about them because of the concerns that Anna raises, like, hey, am I spending way more time in there? Is this undermining my schoolwork? Is it by having my friends on it? Is it interfering with our social interactions? Those are questions that get back to us and that sort of agency that I was trying to talk about. Not about like, hey, let's give the social media companies a free pass. That's not about it. It's about us and what we can do about it right now.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in and say, although maybe you could draw a historical line between radio, TV, and social media, to me, social media isn't a class by itself because of the algorithms, because of the interactive nature, and because of the isolation and individual sort of control that people have over their consumption. A huge part of addiction is that I can control what I consume right now to change the way I feel.
I think that's possibly true, but the same arguments were made when we went from broadcast to cable, right? Okay, now everyone's definitely going to be addicted because they can choose whatever channel they want. And I just think it puts too much power into the tech, and it takes away our ability to adapt. Like, I just don't think people are worried about being addicted to the 800 channels that we can get. That isn't to say, Anna, that you're totally right, that these are new features and we need to be thinking about how they can be, problematic.
Yeah, let me just emphasize, I think that we as individuals do have responsibility. I would never argue otherwise, but I'm not sure kids.
No, completely agree.
And it can't just be left up to individuals. It's so obviously, a communal problem.
Right, 100%. This is where you and I disagree, is that we agree that it's 100% a problem. I love your diffusion point. As a psychologist, that's a weak spot for me, right? I study people and how they interact with each other and what their well-being is. I don't study polarization and democracy, for example. So 100%, that's a fair point. But I still think the addiction overlay causes us to miss some of the real issues that are there, and does move that agency around a little bit in a way that I think isn't helpful for for families or individuals, even when we think about kids.
Well, I think what a lot of people object to with this loss of agency concept, which is key to the idea of addiction, right, is that they just don't want to live in a world where there's loss of agency, right? They want to live in a world where they feel like, pull myself up by my bootstraps and I should be able to do this. But I can tell you, being in the field of addiction medicine has really opened my eyes to the loss of agency that people experience in the severest forms of addiction.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pretend to be a student and ask one last question to Anna. I don't know if this is true, but all the fiction dealing with alcoholics say that, if you are an alcoholic, once you stop, you should never have another drink. Is that true for alcoholism? Is it true for some other forms of addiction? Because the theory is that then you're just going to get off the wagon. And is that true for social media?
Yeah, so great question, and really relevant for this topic and also for our times. In the field of alcohol and alcoholism, the thinking used to be once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, that you could never go back to drinking alcohol, and we no longer believe that to be the case. So for the most severe forms of people addicted to alcohol, it's probably still true, but what we see clinically, and also there's data to show this, that some individuals, after a period of abstinence from alcohol, actually are able to return to using alcohol in moderation. And I believe Gavin Newsom self-identifies as somebody in that category, someone who had an alcohol use disorder, abstained for a period of time, and now drinks in moderation. Moderation is a really important area of focus in the field of addiction medicine now, because there are more and more addictions that people simply cannot abstain from, technology being one of them, food, being another. So that's where we have to really then begin to think about, or for that matter, sex addiction, right? We think sex is a healthy part of a thriving life. What do you do with people with severe life-threatening sex addiction? Should they never have sex again? No, we're not approaching it that way. We're approaching it, okay, what are the healthy forms of sex that you want to incorporate in your life and that others agree are healthy for them and others? What is a healthy engagement with technology? I am not at all saying, we should get rid of technology, and that will never happen. For all I know, 50 years from now, we'll all be cybernetically enhanced and part of the hive mind, right? And everything I'm saying now will have absolutely no relevance because we'll just be living in the hive mind. I don't know. But, from where I stand now, it's looking for the happy medium, which is the goal here. And also prevention, protecting kids whose minds are not fully developed.
Great. We should put up the question again. The polling question. So please fill out the poll. Use your social media to fill out the poll.
But not too much pulling, it could be addictive.
Move some minds.
There was
A non-trivial change.
There was only one way to go.
That's right, there's only one way.
Well, please join me in thanking our speakers for a really interesting debate. Thank you.